What if America's economic sanctions on China are not as effective as we think? Yes, it's a provocative question, isn't it? Today, we're slicing through the headlines and delving deep into the economic game of chess between these two global titans. We'll explore the reasons, the strategies, and the potential aftermath of America's economic sanctions on China. Are they really working, or are they just a smokescreen in a larger geopolitical standoff? Prepare to challenge your preconceived notions about international trade and economic sanctions. Before we delve into the heart of the matter, let's understand what economic sanctions are. Imagine a schoolyard bully who takes away your lunch money. Instead of a physical show of power, economic sanctions are a similar concept, but on a global scale. They're a diplomatic tool, a way for one country to flex its economic muscles and influence another country's behavior. Usually, they are imposed by a larger economy or a group of nations to express disapproval of certain actions or policies of the target country. This could be due to a range of reasons: human rights violations, acts of aggression, or even nuclear proliferation. So how do they work? Well, it's about hitting them where it hurts: the wallet. Economic sanctions restrict trade and investment, causing economic hardship in the target country. They can take various forms like tariffs, quotas, embargoes, asset freezes, and even travel bans. The idea is to create enough economic discomfort to force a change in behavior. It's about making the cost of certain actions too high to bear. In a way, it's like turning the economic screws until the targeted country says, "Uncle." But it's not just about punishment. Economic sanctions are also a signal to the international community. They send a message that certain behaviors won't be tolerated. It's a way of isolating the misbehaving country, making it a pariah on the global stage. However, like that school bully, economic sanctions can also be seen as an abuse of power. Critics argue that they often hurt the most vulnerable citizens of the targeted country, not the government officials who are typically the intended targets. Moreover, economic sanctions are a slow burn. They take time to have an effect, and in that time, the targeted country can find ways to circumvent them. It's like trying to contain water with a sieve. There's always going to be some leakage. But do these sanctions always work as intended? Let's find out. The United States has a long history of imposing economic sanctions on China. This tale of financial muscle flexing dates back to the mid-20th century when China emerged as a global power. In the early years of the People's Republic, the US sought to curtail China's influence by imposing a full embargo. This strict economic clampdown persisted for over 2 decades until President Nixon's historic visit to Beijing in the early 70s. The thawing of relations in the 70s saw a relaxation of sanctions, ushering in a period of cautious economic engagement that lasted until the end of the millennium. Yet, this did not spell an end to economic friction between the two powers. The turn of the 21st century saw a resurgence of sanctions, this time driven by concerns over China's human rights record, its stance on Tibet, and accusations of technology theft. In the last decade, the sanction game has intensified. From the Obama administration's restrictions on tech exports to the Trump administration's tariffs and bans on Chinese tech giants, the US has employed a variety of economic weapons in its dealings with China. The Biden administration has continued this trend, focusing on issues of human rights, trade practices, and technology. Yet the question that looms large in the wake of this history is not about the frequency or severity of these sanctions. Instead, it's about their effectiveness. In the face of these economic pressures, has China changed its behavior? Have these sanctions achieved their desired outcomes, or have they merely served to escalate tensions? As we delve deeper into this complex issue, it's important to remember that sanctions are not just about economics. They're about politics, diplomacy, and power. They're a tool in the toolbox of international relations, wielded with the hope of shaping a country's behavior. But has the intended impact been achieved? Here's where things get interesting. Sanctions, by design, are meant to exert pressure on the target country, making it harder for them to conduct business as usual. While it's true that America's sanctions on China have certainly caused some disruption, the reality of the situation is far more complex than it first appears. Firstly, let's look at how these sanctions have affected China's economy. There's no denying that they've hit certain sectors hard. Industries that rely heavily on American components or technology have felt the pinch. However, the overall impact on China's economy has been less severe than one might expect. Why is that? Well, it's largely due to China's sheer economic size and diversity. With the world's second largest economy, it has a vast domestic market that can absorb a lot of the shock. In fact, some sectors have even seen a boost as companies scramble to find alternatives to American goods. Moreover, the Chinese government has implemented various measures to mitigate the impact, such as providing financial support to affected industries and encouraging domestic innovation. But that's not all. China has also managed to circumvent these sanctions in some clever ways. One method is through the use of third-party countries. By rerouting trade through these nations, China can effectively bypass American sanctions. It's a bit like a game of economic hide-and-seek, and it's proving to be quite effective. Another strategy is to strengthen ties with other major economies. This not only helps to offset the loss of the American market, but also serves to reduce China's economic dependence on the United States. It's a long-term strategy that could potentially reshape the global economic landscape. Of course, these tactics are not without their challenges. The rerouting of trade can lead to increased costs and logistical complications, and the push for domestic innovation is a tall order, requiring significant investment in research and development. But so far, China has shown a remarkable ability to adapt and weather the storm. So, what does all this mean? Well, it means that the effectiveness of America's sanctions on China is not as clear-cut as it might seem. While they have undoubtedly caused some disruption, their overall impact has been blunted by China's economic resilience and strategic maneuvering. In other words, China is not just a passive recipient of these sanctions. It's an active player in this economic chess game, making moves of its own. As we can see, the impact of the sanctions is not as straightforward as one might assume. China has not been idle in the face of these sanctions, however. This economic giant has been playing a strategic game, employing a number of countermeasures to mitigate the impact of U.S. sanctions. One of the most significant countermeasures that China has undertaken is diversifying its trade partners. By widening its trade network, China has been able to reduce its reliance on the United States, thereby reducing the impact of any sanctions. It has sought out new markets, forming partnerships with countries in Africa, South America, and even Europe. This diversification strategy has allowed the country to continue its economic growth despite the barriers put up by the United States. In addition to this, China has also focused on self-reliance, particularly in areas where it was heavily dependent on American technology or goods. The country has been ramping up its domestic industries, investing heavily in technology and manufacturing sectors. For instance, China has made significant strides in its semiconductor industry, aiming to reduce its reliance on American-made chips. The drive for self-reliance has not only helped China weather the storm of sanctions, but also fostered innovation within the country. Moreover, China has been utilizing its economic clout to push back against the sanctions. This includes using its position as the world's largest consumer market to exert influence over multinational companies and encourage them to lobby against the sanctions on its behalf. In the realm of international diplomacy, China has been championing the cause of multilateralism and free trade, positioning itself as a defender of the global economic order against American unilateralism. This has helped it garner support from other countries, further diluting the impact of the sanctions. In sum, China's countermeasures have been multifaceted, strategic, and effective. They have showcased the country's resilience and adaptability in the face of external pressures. So while the sanctions have certainly posed challenges, they have not brought the Chinese economy to its knees. On the contrary, they have spurred the country to develop new strategies and capabilities and diversify its economic relations. China's resilience and adaptability is a key factor in the effectiveness of these sanctions. But what about the impact on the United States? Let's delve into the economic repercussions of these sanctions on American soil. The ripples of these decisions extend far beyond the political sphere, reaching into the pockets of businesses and consumers alike. Firstly, consider the American businesses with significant investments in China. These range from the tech industry to manufacturing and even entertainment. These sanctions can lead to a loss of market access for these businesses, potentially causing a significant hit to their bottom line. For instance, imagine a tech giant that relies on Chinese factories for parts or assembly. Economic sanctions could disrupt this supply chain, leading to increased costs or production delays. Similarly, an American film studio with a substantial Chinese audience could see its box office returns dwindle if sanctions lead to a backlash against American products. In addition, these sanctions can also result in retaliatory measures from China. The country could impose its own sanctions on American goods, leading to a decrease in exports for American manufacturers. But the impact isn't just limited to businesses. Average American consumers could also feel the pinch. Many of the goods we take for granted in our daily lives, from electronics to clothing, are manufactured in China. Sanctions could lead to increased prices for these goods, adding to the cost of living for everyday Americans. Furthermore, the economic uncertainty resulting from these sanctions can also have an impact on the stock market. Investors may become wary, leading to increased market volatility. This can affect anyone with a retirement account or investments in the stock market. Finally, consider the potential impact on jobs. Many American companies rely on trade with China. If that trade is disrupted, it could lead to job losses or reduced wages for American workers. It's important to understand that economic sanctions are not just a foreign policy tool. They have real, tangible impacts on the economy, businesses, and individuals. They can lead to a cascade of economic consequences, some of which can be deeply felt on home soil. So it's clear that these sanctions do not come without a cost. Economic sanctions, while a powerful diplomatic tool, have far-reaching implications that can reverberate back to the United States, affecting not just the entities they target, but also American businesses, consumers, and the economy at large. Let's broaden our perspective and consider the global implications. When we think about the economic sanctions imposed by America on China, we can't ignore the wider global repercussions. These sanctions are not just a two-player game, they have a ripple effect that touches every corner of the world. Let's start with international trade. In this interconnected world, trade is a web of intricate relationships, and any disruption in this web can cause a domino effect. When America places sanctions on China, it's not just Chinese businesses that suffer. American companies that rely on Chinese goods and services are also affected. And beyond that, any country that is connected to either America or China through trade can feel the impact. Further, these sanctions can also strain diplomatic relations between countries. When one country imposes sanctions on another, it's a clear sign of disapproval. This can lead to tension not only between the two countries involved, but also among their allies. In this case, America's sanctions on China may cause other countries to choose sides, potentially leading to a divide in international relations. Moreover, the sanctions can influence global economic stability. If the Chinese economy suffers due to the sanctions, it could lead to a slowdown in the world economy. China is the world's second-largest economy, after all. A stumble in China's economic growth can send shockwaves through global markets. Lastly, while sanctions are intended to force a change in behavior, they can also lead to unexpected consequences. For example, they might push the sanctioned country to form new alliances and trade relationships that could alter the global balance of power. In essence, the impact of these sanctions doesn't stop at the borders of America and China. They have the potential to affect international trade, diplomatic relations, global economic stability, and even the world's power dynamics. The ripple effects of these sanctions reach far and wide. So, what can we take away from all this? Let's begin by revisiting the concept of economic sanctions. We've learned that they are essentially financial penalties imposed by one country on another with the intention to force a change in policy or behavior. However, their effectiveness can vary widely, and they are not always the silver bullet they're often made out to be. Remember our exploration into the history of America's sanctions on China? It's a tale bathed in political tension and economic maneuvering. From the outset, these sanctions were intended to curb China's economic growth and influence. But history has shown us that they've had mixed results at best. This brings us to the reality of sanctions. We've seen that they can often lead to unintended consequences. In the case of China, the country's robust and diverse economy has allowed it to weather these sanctions. Moreover, the country's integration into the global economy means that American sanctions can have a ripple effect, impacting not just China but other countries as well. China's countermeasures have also demonstrated the country's resilience and adaptability. By developing domestic industries, diversifying trade partners, and utilizing its economic clout, China has managed to mitigate the impact of American sanctions. Then there's the economic impact on the U.S. itself. It's important to understand that sanctions are a two-way street. They can lead to higher costs for American businesses and consumers, and potentially affect jobs and economic growth. Lastly, from a global perspective, we've seen that the world is more interconnected than ever before. Economic actions in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences in another. This means that the decision to impose economic sanctions must be made with a deep understanding of these global interdependencies. So, we come full circle. Back to our initial question and the complexities of international trade and economic sanctions. It's clear that they are not a one-size-fits-all solution, and their effectiveness is highly dependent on the specific circumstances. This brings us to the end of our journey. We've delved into the complexities of international trade, the potential limitations of economic sanctions, and the intricate dance of global politics and economics. We've seen that when it comes to economic sanctions, there's much more than meets the eye. It's clear that the effectiveness of America's economic sanctions on China is a complex and multifaceted issue.